Josh and I have been starting our own seeds for probably about 20 years now, and we've made, I think, every single mistake in the book when it comes to seed starting. So today I wanted to take you through the top 5 seed starting mistakes that you might be making that are ruining your transplants and show you how I do it instead. So let's go check it out. The first mistake that Josh and I made when we were seed starting many years ago, we learned this one really quickly, is to only use high quality seeds and to be careful about how you actually store them. You can find cheap seeds all over the place, from your hardware store to the dollar store to all over the place. But the reality is you don't really know what is in those seeds and if they're what they say that they are. There's a term in the seed industry that they use, or a phrase that's called the sweepings. And that literally means they're sweeping up the floor of everything that kind of got mixed in and dumped over the side of the conveyor belt and all those things, and they go into a seed packet somewhere. So you don't always know exactly what you're getting unless you're working with reputable seed companies, or of course, if you're saving your own seeds. Josh and I are saving more and more of our own seeds, but a lot of the seeds that we're planting today, we are not yet saving. So one of the companies that we really love, because it's kind of local in the area to us, is Adaptive Seeds. We've purchased from them for years. Of course, we love Baker Creek, so we have a lot of seeds coming from them. But for us, it's really important to have heirloom seeds that we can save our own seeds from. Heirloom or open pollinated, that we could eventually save our own seeds from. So make sure you're getting really good quality seeds to start with. And if you can, please try to go with a local supplier or somebody who's actually growing their seed stock in your area of the country. If you have somebody who's really local to you, all the better. Please support them and buy the varieties that they have. When it comes to storing your seeds, I love these photo storage bins. And then we just have, the small bins that are inside. I have each one labeled, and then we can store our seed packets inside of these. And as long as you're keeping your seeds all the way dry, away from any source of moisture, away from too much heat, and away from any direct sunlight, then most of your seeds are going to last for several years really easily. Some of them are a little fussier. Things like onions and parsnips are kind of known to lose their germination rate pretty quickly. So you might want to buy those yearly. But if you're storing these in a nice, dry, dark area and keeping them, relatively cool, then your seeds should last you for quite a while. So make sure you're buying good quality seeds and you're storing them properly so you keep a high germination rate. Here we are at my seed starting station to look at the setup. And this is mistake number 2, is not getting your seed starting station set up correctly. When we first started starting seeds on our own, we tried all different things, from putting them in a mostly bright sunny windowsill to keeping them close to the wood cook stove to keep them warm enough. And all of those things created different problems. So we finally got our seed starting station right. So let me give you a little tour of it. One, we have the LED grow lights here. These are the all spectrum. You don't need the all spectrum. You can just go with regular old shop lights for your seed starting. But having lights on them is super important. And you'll notice that I have them on chains so that I can move it up and down and adjust those lights, because you want to get the light pretty much right on top of your starts the best you can. Make sure you read the information that comes with your lights, especially if they are grow lights, because different lights have different heights they should be at above the plants. But for these, they need to be kind of like right down on the plant. So you can see we have them right there. In the past, when we had these trays in an area where it had a lot of windows, we had a lot of problems with them because the plants would want to grow off towards the natural sunlight in the windows, and they'd end up getting long and leggy by leaning towards the window. So by moving them back into this back hallway where we don't really have any windows or any ambient lighting besides just the indoor lighting, this has really, really helped. Another thing though is that you really do want to keep your space on the cooler room temperature side. Now, when we're first starting our plants, we have them on germination mats. And those are just the little mats that go under the trays. I have them set up for our plants that we're starting today. But they're just that, they're germination mats. They need to only be on your plants while they are actively germinating. And as soon as most of your tray has germinated and you're starting to see the little seedlings up, you need to turn them off and let the area be a little bit cooler. Most plants really prefer to be in about 65-degree-ish at this stage of their life cycle. So make sure that you have those germination mats, but then you turn them off and let the room temperature be a little bit cooler. Now, another thing that you want to make sure to do is to get some air movement on your plants if you can. Right now I have the fans flicked off, but we have these small fans and they just oscillate and they just help to dry out the surface of the plants, but they also help to make the plants stronger with the movement. So this is going to reduce your time that it takes to harden off your plants once you get them all done before you get them out into the ground. So getting this set up just right was a huge game changer for us, and this has been really important. Mistake number 3 that we used to make is actually a really big one, and this has to do with sterilizing the different parts of your seed starting. I'm not always excited about the idea of sterilizing things because when you sterilize something, you kind of remove everything from it. And then that really opens up the opportunity for the bad guys like the yeasts and the molds and the insects and anything like that to really move in because you don't have the balance of the good bacteria or the other good microorganisms in the soil that keep things in check. But when it comes to seed starting, one of the things that we have working against us is coming out of winter. Your compost is probably not as bioactive as it was going into winter after sitting all winter long, even if you are lucky enough to have good compost that is bioactive. And so it's not quite ready to fight off the bad guys. And then we put it into this great situation where it's warm, it's damp, it's all the things that the microorganisms love. Unfortunately, it seems like the bad microorganisms grow faster than the good ones. So they end up taking over your soil and you can have problems based on that. So that really has led us to believe that there's 2 ways to start your plants. One, with either really bioactive compost mixed with topsoil, or 2, with sterilized soil and pots. Because of the winters here, we usually make up a seed starting mix and we put it into a large trash can and store it in the basement so that we can get to our soil when we need it in the spring. And with that mix, it's really just half of our really good quality homegrown compost and half of our topsoil here from the ground. And we like to screen that so it's really nice and fine, and then we store it. In the storing process, it tends to dry out quite a bit, which is going to kill off a lot of the microorganisms. So I know that I don't have a great bioactive soil or seed starting mix that I'm starting with. So therefore, I want to make sure it's sterilized. Sterilizing the soil is really simple. You just throw it into a deep pan like this and put it into the oven for about 30 minutes at 350 degrees. That's going to heat it up to a level that it should kill everything off pretty sufficiently. If you want to stick an oven thermometer into it, you really want your soil to get up to about 160 degrees Fahrenheit. If you're starting with your own homemade seed starting mix, you can be ready to actually get those into your pots. If you are buying seed starting mix, make sure you're actually purchasing seedling mix or starting mix, because that has usually been sterilized. Now, it does have the downside that it may have been laying around at the garden center for a while and you don't really know what's gotten into it or what's happened to it, but at least it's starting off sterilized. If you're sterilizing your soil though, you really do need to sterilize your starting pots. If you're working with a plastic pot like this, then it's actually pretty simple. You're going to use 10-to-1 water to bleach, and you're going to get these into that solution. You're going to let them sit for about 10 to 15 minutes. Don't rinse them off when you're done. Let them air dry, and then they're ready to go. Don't forget to sterilize your trays also. If you're working with silicone starting pots, which I absolutely love, the answer to sterilizing them is so easy because you literally just drop them in boiling water for about 10 to 12 minutes, pull them right out, let them dry, and you're good to go. So I really like that because I don't really like using bleach around the property, but it is worth it to make sure that you've got a really good foundation for your starts to grow in. When I first started my own seed starting, I really thought that the earlier the better on seed starting because then the plants would be bigger. But I've learned that that just is absolutely not true. So the number 4 mistake that Josh and I were making with seed starting was starting our plants way too early in the hopes that they would be bigger. Most plants should not be started indoors more than 6 weeks before you want to actually get them out growing into the garden. Even things like tomato, I've done some experiments, and the tomatoes that are smaller when they go in the garden definitely in the end outperform the tomatoes that are larger going into the garden. And the reason for that is that they tend to get a little bit stunted and their growth starts to slow down if you leave them in their pots for too long. Even if you're properly fertilizing them or potting them up, it does seem to stunt their growth unless you are just really on top of it and you're really paying attention and working with your starts all the time. I found that except for leeks, onions, bell peppers, and celery, pretty much everything else needs to be under 6 weeks in your transplant pots. For things that are really quickly growing, like summer squash, winter squash, and melons, and even cucumbers, I tend to only start those about 4 weeks before they're going to go out into the garden so that they really don't get too big and start getting root bound or just slow down their growth. So make sure you're not starting your starts too early. So mistake number 5 that we used to make is the way we were watering our starts and the way we were fertilizing them. We used to just have, the little cheap trays that you get from maybe your local hardware store. Maybe they're a 6-cell pack or something like that. And we would just plant right in those and then we would top water on top of them. And that just caused all sorts of problems, from fungal problems to insect problems to dampening off to overwatering. It just really created a lot of problems. So we totally changed our method quite a few years ago, and this has worked super well for us. And that is that we have these hard trays. Down here, this is a 10-20 tray is what they call these nice long ones. And then inside of it, we have these individual starter pots. You can see this kale is growing very nicely. It's ready to go out into the garden next week in cold frames. I love these particular pots. These are from the Bootstrap Farmer and they're really heavy duty. So they have lasted us for 3 years, I think at this point, and I think that they will go easily another 3 years. Another pot that I absolutely love, this one's making me very excited, is these new Silly Seedling pots. They're actually silicone, they're food grade silicone, so there's no plastic touching your plants. I love that. And like we talked about in the sterilization part, they're super easy to sterilize because you can just drop them into boiling water. I mean, you could bake muffins and these things if you wanted. They're so food grade, which makes them really great. The other thing that we did not do is we did not fertilize our seedlings very well, and we ended up having a lot of problems because of it. We were, using that great compost as part of the mix, and so we really were thinking that that should provide enough nutrition for our plants. What was happening is they were just slowing down too much. They just weren't getting the right amount of nutrition. So now I've started that as soon as the plants get the first true leaves, so these are these two nice little leaves that are the bigger real leaves and not those seedling leaves. As soon as the plants get those, then I start fertilizing in their water. Now I always just use the Neptune's Harvest. This is a really great one. I really like this one. And I fertilize at half the strength that is recommended when they're seedlings. And I do that at least once a week, again, starting when they get their first true leaves. This has allowed my plants to keep growing really robustly and really strong while they're still in the pot, so that when they get to hardening off and they get outside into the actual soil, they just keep growing and they're really healthy and really strong. So make sure that you get a really good quality fertilizer, hopefully something organic, and you start fertilizing your seedlings. We do that, and we do any normal watering just by creating a solution of the fertilizer in the water, pouring it into this bottom pot, and then letting it sit for about an hour. After an hour, we go ahead and pour off any water that is remaining in the trays so that they don't get overwatered and start dealing with issues from that. The tops of your plants should be slightly dry to the touch. That's just fine. And when you're bottom watering like this, it's a perfect solution because the trays themselves and the pots, the soil in the pots, will actually be wet without having the top wet all the time. And that's where you start introducing the fungal problems, is right here on the surface. Watering this way is a great way to go, as long as you remember to dump out the excess after about an hour and don't let your plants just sit in water all the time. Hopefully you can get away with only watering every several days to sometimes, especially if you're in a cooler, you have your plants in that cooler room, sometimes you can get away with a whole week between waterings. Now you're all ready for seed starting success. Now, hey, if you need a spot to put these plants because you don't have a garden bed yet, or you want to extend your garden bed, then check out this video right here where Josh shows you how to make an instant garden.